Hello from Frankfurt and welcome once again to this special edition of No Talks live from the Frankfurt Book Fair that is brought to you by the United Nations Development Programme and the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation. This is the third day of these No Talks and this is the second and final session for the day. However, the sessions continue tomorrow and Sunday with 4 more sessions. Today's session is about multidimensional poverty. We have with us Kevin Hempel, founder and managing director at Prospera Consulting. And before founding Prospera, Kevin used to work for the World Bank in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you.
So this session is titled Multidimensional Poverty, Implications for Labor Market Policies. For any questions you may have, please drop them in the Q&A section, and I'll make sure to ask them to Kevin if they are related to what we are discussing. However, if they are technical, my team will be happy to provide all the answers. And interpretation is available into French and Arabic, and you can also choose that from the menu on the bottom of your screen. Welcome, Kevin. We are very happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Before we start, can you tell me a bit what you do at Prospera Consulting?
Sure. So we're a small consulting firm, and we're specialized essentially in labor market issues and employment promotion, especially for vulnerable groups across the world. So we work a lot in Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa, etc. And so we always wonder how to best support governments, donor agencies, big NGOs to design effective programs that really work for the people. So this is what we really care about, and that's what we do.
That's great. So Kevin, you have a presentation. I'll be sharing it for you, and you will be telling us everything related. What is multidimensional poverty? And what are its implications for labor market policies? So just to set the scene with these few slides, and then we'll start with some questions I have prepared for you, and then questions from the audience. I will turn off my camera. This way, people can focus with you on the presentation, but I'll be here. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, I thought maybe for the audience, just 2 slides to set the scene and bring everyone in the audience on the same page as to what we broadly want to talk about. So you can go to the next slide. So what is multidimensional poverty? Okay, so usually when we talk about poverty, we refer to the left side here of the slide, which is income poverty, monetary poverty. We think of poverty as not having enough money to meet your basic needs. And countries specify their own thresholds as to how much money do you need for those basic needs, and there's also international poverty lines. One well-known one is around $2 a day, and then for middle income countries it's around a bit more than $3 a day, for higher income countries over $5 a day. So this is how we often think and measure poverty. Okay, now when we talk about multidimensional poverty, what we want to recognize is that poverty isn't just limited to not having enough money. There are many other dimensions in life that are affected. And so UNDP, together with Oxford University years ago, started this multidimensional poverty index. And that particular index, you see in the middle here, looks at additional dimensions of life, mainly health, education, and living standards. And that's so issues around malnutrition, child mortality, the lack of schooling, lack of drinking water, electricity, poor housing. These are all obviously also dimensions of poverty that make sense, but that aren't captured in just the income poverty. So when we talk about multidimensional poverty, we refer to those. But then when you, and this, in the case of this index, these are just some comparable, these 10 indicators that are compared across the world. When you look at a country level, countries may choose to add other dimensions as well. So that's what you see on the right-hand side. Really safety issues, or poor working conditions, lack of social inclusion, or the poor quality of public spaces. may also be considered elements of poverty if these are really not well. So just to give you that broader sense of what do we mean by multidimensional poverty. And you can move on to the next slide. What does now that understanding of poverty mean for public policy? Okay, I'm just going to give a sort of some food for thought. This is not comprehensive, and we'll dive in more in the discussion. So what does it mean when people don't get the food they need and don't get the schooling they need, etc.? So there's multiple implications that then affect how we need to think about people. So one thing is when you don't get the right food, and when you're not healthy, that affects your brain. That affects your ability to work. It may even lead to disability, physical, mental, otherwise. Okay, and that of course then affects how you can gain opportunities, etc. Now, when you don't go to school, or really not very long, you end up with very limited levels of literacy and numeracy. So then again, that affects your ability to maybe get a job or even engage with programs that try to support you. When you have to go out for drinking water, or you don't have, you have to wash your stuff by hand and so on and so forth, it means you don't have much time for many other things. So it affects how you use your time at houses. It's especially the issue for women. If you live in overcrowded housing, that may be very stressful. So that affects you. If you don't have phones or computers, that limits your access to information to even maybe know about certain programs or communicate with people. If the safety is an issue, or you don't have, a motorbike or bike or car, you can maybe get to different places. So all of these things, just to give you a sense that, multidimensional poverty isn't just some abstract thing to worry about, but it really affects the reality of people's lives and how they interact also with policies and of course, their ability to search for and get a job. Back to you, Stephanie.
Yes, great. Thank you, Kevin. I'm just going to keep this slide for just a minute for anyone who would like to follow us on social media, where we are having live tweets on our Twitter account. So this would be the most useful to follow in these accounts, and also for all updates with the portal, the knowledgeforall.com or .org. So yes, thank you, Kevin. You have mentioned the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the MPI, and you cannot talk about multidimensional poverty without mentioning this very important index that is produced by our colleagues at the Human Development Report Office and the Oxford Poverty Institute. So the latest Multidimensional Poverty Index 2022 was just released earlier this week, and we were just having a conversation earlier this week, both of us, when they just sent the link to the report, and the launch was on that same day. So the data of the new MPI suggests that multidimensional poverty is most prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Do you think the concept of multidimensional poverty is also useful in other regions, including richer countries?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. So if we just look at the data from that report, it looks like, maybe it's not that big of an issue in regions such as the Middle East or Europe or parts of East Asia, for instance. I'll give you some examples of some countries. So a country like Serbia in Europe, or Jordan in the Middle East, or Thailand, they have, according to the data in that report, multidimensional poverty rates that are lower than 1%. So you could say, well, that doesn't seem to be really a problem. Okay, but we have to be a bit careful how we interpret those numbers. Obviously, what the index measures is those very specific indicators that it includes and for which it has comparable data across the world, such as child mortality, such as access to drinking water, or the schooling levels. Now, granted, in middle income countries, many of which in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe or in East Asia, these are not the main issues. Child mortality, these were issues that are largely overcome. People have basic access to infrastructure like water and sanitation, but doing better. And so that's why they get a very low percentage of multidimensional poverty in the data, but doesn't mean that people don't face multiple problems. So it just means that the poverty in those countries doesn't maybe relate to those very specific indicators, but to other dimensions. And so I would, I'm very convinced that, it's still useful to think about this concept of broader poverty, multidimensional, beyond just income, that really can be applied to anywhere in the world.
Definitely, Kevin. So how do you think the concept of multidimensional poverty can be useful for policymaking?
Well, so the main way I think it is useful is that it helps us to get a better perspective of people's lives, a more realistic perspective of the complexity of poor people's lives. I think that's really what it's not about percentages, it's about it's not just money. Okay, and that broader understanding is really important if we want to design policies, including labor market policies, to support these people. But the truth is, I think we're often not so good at understanding the reality of these lives. Why? Well, it's very natural in some ways. The people who design the policies and the programs, work in development agencies or in NGOs, we are not those very poor people. And even with the best of intentions, we just often lack the full understanding and empathy and humility to really know what it means to live in these conditions. And that's why then some of the way we design policies and programs doesn't really take that into account. And then that leads to, not so successful, outcomes. So I think having that really more realistic, broader understanding can help us design better policies.
Okay. So you mentioned this lack of understanding people's situation. How does this, I'd say, common lack of understanding people's situation manifest itself in labor market policies?
Right. So let me give you an example. So when we talk about labor market policies, so one common.
Sorry, Kevin.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Because we are having many people, like some people raising their hands. We are not taking any live questions. So please, if anyone has questions, please just drop them in the Q&A box. Thank you and sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, and we'll get back to all the audience questions later, I'm sure.
Sure.
So how does this lack of understanding affect labor market policies? So what do we mean by labor market policies? Just to, what are the common ones? So one common area is sort of so-called active labor market policies. So these are policies trying to actively help people get into jobs, improve their income. So these are things such as job search support, trainings, helping people start self-employment in some ways. This could be subsidies to employers to hire vulnerable people. Temporary public works. So these are some of the common sort of policy instruments we have. So if we just take a narrow view of poverty, it's like, okay, you're poor, you don't have enough money, I want to help you get a job. Well, so let me try to put you in one of these programs. Okay, here's a training program. You can attend that. And hopefully when you're done with that, you'll find a job and you'll be better. So this would be maybe the simplified view if we oversimplify people's lives. Now, what's the problem with that? So, well, let's think for a little bit. If someone doesn't have good access to information, right, because they're poor, well, how would they even find out about this program, right? How would they even know? If someone doesn't have the mobility to, let's say, travel, to get somewhere, or it costs, tickets, how would they get there, right? Or if, let's say, you are a woman and you have household responsibilities, childcare responsibilities, all these things, do you have the time to attend the schedule, the way this program is structured? Okay. If you live in a stressful environment, how does that affect? Are you able to attend all of these things? So, and then let's imagine even if you're able to manage to get through all of that somehow, and you're able to maybe apply for, even get some sort of work, well, your life is still the same first, right? I mean, are you able to keep that job? I mean, your life is really complicated. So not taking into account some of these factors, what it means then is we people may not sign up. So, we have low uptake maybe of these programs. People drop out of these programs. The programs aren't effective. People, they aren't able to find the jobs or opportunities that we want them to. And even if they do, they may drop out and, not be able to retain those things. So another thing that I think which is typically underestimated when we think about people is that all that stress, this complex living situation, it really, we know from like over 10 years of research, it really consumes people's, we call it mental bandwidth. So if we have problems, if we don't have enough of something, not enough food, we worry about where the next meal comes from, what to do with our children, it sort of gives us sort of a bit of a tunnel vision. This is true for all of us. And that means our attention is just focused on that problem, and we don't have much energy and mental space to look at anything else. And so what that means is that poor people aren't just poor because they don't have money or they don't have a phone or all of these things. They also don't have much attention for anything else. It's just their basic needs. And that affects their ability to process information, to plan ahead, to take decisions, things we need for them to engage with policies. Okay, so it's really key that we take this into account. And we know it from ourselves in some way too. Imagine you're trying to study or to work when you're like very sick, or when you're very hungry, or when you have like 3 kids running around you and wanting to play with you, and you're trying. We know that you can't work or concentrate on anything. So now imagine yourself in like deep poverty where all of that is just amplified. We really need to seriously think about those lives so that we can have also successful labor market policies.
Great. So what do we need to do?
Well, I think the first step we just need to be serious about is to really understand what in the local context where we work, in this country, in this district, with the specific people we're trying to serve, we really need to be serious about understanding their lives. Okay, I like to think of it a bit like take the comparison to medicine. I mean, who's a good doctor? A good doctor isn't just someone who prescribes you something. A good doctor is someone who takes time to really understand your problem and where it comes from. It does a good diagnosis. So in public policy, we need to do the same. We need to really understand the challenges that our target groups are facing. And so data like the one from the Multidimensional Poverty Index, that can help. There's other data sources, but sometimes, that kind of data is missing, especially at sort of local and disaggregated level. So we also need to just, essentially immerse ourselves in these people's lives. That means, qualitative research, shadowing, trying to really somehow get a sense of the complexities that people face, so that we can take that understanding into account and design more effective approaches. And we know that organizations who do take and who know their target groups very well, they also come up with much better solutions. Their programs are much more effective.
Sure. You have mentioned again the MPI, the Multidimensional Poverty Index, and I have mentioned in the beginning of the session that it is produced by our colleagues at the Human Development Report Office. And I think I said the Oxford Poverty Institute, but it is the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. So just as a clarification. Kevin, you mentioned effective approaches. What does an effective approach for labor market policies look like?
Sure. So I don't, there isn't, we would all love to have these clear solutions, and there isn't one size fits all. I mean, it's complex, and that's why this diagnosis is so important, so that we can adjust. But there are some commonalities, I think, and I think the common thread around helping people in multidimensional poverty is programs need to be comprehensive and integrated, which reflects essentially the multiple barriers and challenges people face, right? We can't just focus on this one narrow thing because people face challenges on so many levels. So we need to think about more comprehensive approaches. there was a nice quote actually in that report from a it's not about labor, but from a health worker in Honduras, and it was about child nutrition. And she said, well, you know, we can't just think about health or when we want to you know, improve the nutrition of children, because this malnutrition is also affected by family income and household just, you know, conditions. So in labor markets the same way, we can't just look narrowly at the labor policies, we need to look a bit broader. So let me give you an example. So I've recently been working with on how to best integrate ethnic minorities, Roma, in the labor market in Europe. And so Roma minority is really one of the poorest in facing one of the poorest living conditions in Europe. You know, low literacy, the segregated communities, often poor health conditions, no formal work really that they have, often also expectations or work preferences and so on along gender lines, many things that really, you know, you can really see the multidimensional part of the poverty. So what do you need to do? Okay, or what are successful organizations doing working with these groups? So, well, number one, they go to them. Okay, so you find them where they are. You have targeted outreach. You go where they are through trusted people they trust, etc. Right? So you don't just expect them to come to you. So this is a start. You go. You do, even at that level, even if you do an individual assessment with them, because they're all still different, right? So an older woman still has different needs than a young Roma man. So you still need to understand the very specific conditions in which they live and so on. And then you continue with sort of personalized intensive counseling, be this at the individual level, one-on-one, or with groups, or even at the family level to take, you know, capture that you get the family support also for someone to go work and so on. You try to provide a supportive environment. You also try to connect them with other social services, because, you know, they're not just lacking a job. They may not have an ID. They may have maybe debt issues. They may have health issues, administrative things. So unless you can somehow help them resolve these issues in their lives, they'll never be even able to really focus on work, right? So you have to connect them also with other providers, social services to resolve that. And then once you've done that, that's where you can start to think about sort of labor market stuff, job search assistance, help them prepare for searching for a job, etc. And then link them to certain support programs, such as training, such as maybe some startup assistance, temporary works or something. But even when you do that, you have to be very careful, because it's very easy to drop back out right away. So successful programs, what they do then is really focus also on post-placement support. So you really hand-holding them as they start these things so that they don't drop out right away. You're there to fix challenges, maybe help them get there, you know, when the day they don't want to go, so that it's not immediately over. So you see that, you know, this is a really comprehensive approach. And it includes these elements of labor market support, job search assistance, training, other things, but it goes way beyond that. So, you know, just as an example.
Okay, great. You mentioned earlier that one of the commonly overlooked factors is that given the complexity of their lives, people living in poverty, they may struggle to pay attention and plan ahead. Or in other terms, like how they call it, like they have limited mental bandwidth. So how does that factor, how does that, how does it have an implication into a successful program approach?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's really important, right? So how does that lead us to do things differently than maybe the traditional way we do things? And I think that it really affects how we think through the service delivery, so the processes and procedures in which we set up these programs. I think my short answer would be we need to make it easy. Okay, we'll need to keep things easy. So their lives are complex. They have very limited bandwidth to pay attention, to plan, to deal with stuff. So we need to make it easy to engage with us, to get through. So what does that mean in practice? Let's say outreach. You know, we go to them. You know, we don't force them to find out. We go to them, we explain. Registration, again, we may go to them, we may help them sign up. It's not just some form we send them, some complicated form that they fill out, which, you know, they're distracted and, you know, it's already lost. We do it with them, we make it easy. Where do the services take place? Either we help them get there, right? We organize transportation to take them to the thing so they don't have to figure it out, or maybe even better, we organize these activities in their communities, close to their communities, so that makes it easy to get there. Okay, so just to give you some examples, but we need to take out as many hassles and little bits that sometimes seem trivial that could affect their attendance. You know, a good user experience is really important for all of us, you know, when we access government services or when we're in the grocery store or whatever. But for people who have such complicated, difficult lives, these little things, you know, they can make all the difference, whether they ultimately get through it or not. So we really need to be aware of that.
Definitely, this is very important what you're saying, Kevin. And development programs need to make themselves available to their target. Otherwise, they will not be effective. Another question. So there's a huge skills gap, and some sort of poverty that is related to skills deprivation. People are not qualified to enter the job market.
Mm-hmm.
So you lost me. Okay,
continue.
can you? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you lost me.
The last sentence I lost, but about skills.
Yes.
Just continue.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So I was just saying that there's this huge skills gap, and this poverty that is related to like a skills poverty or skills deprivation. And what can governments and development agencies do to support these people and help bridge the skills gap?
Yeah, no, you're right. So, and like we saw in the index, and the lack of schooling and all of that is, you know, affecting people's ability to successfully engage with the labor market. Absolutely. But we need to be careful. So first thing we need to do, I think, is we need to break down what do we mean by skills. Okay, so skills, there are many different factors. So are we talking about sort of foundational basic literacy, numeracy skills, right? Because if people don't complete basic education, that may be an issue. And that, of course, affects really how we need to think about them, what they can do, and what we need to offer. So that's foundational sort of basic skills. The second are technical skills. So typically when people don't have basic education, they also often have trouble entering, let's say, some sort of more vocational technical education, because you need to be able to read and write to, you know, follow some sort of more formal technical education. So they don't have that either. So, okay, so there's another technical skills gap. And then third, what we also usually observe is that there's issues around socio-emotional skills, what I would call it. So these may be things related to self-esteem, self-management, but also interpersonal relationships, such as communication and so on, right? So these are all very different types of skills. Now, once we break down and identify and prioritize which of these skills are the key issue for the group we're dealing with now, local context, we can think about solutions. So, you know, if the for the basic literacy, we can think, okay, maybe we need the component around second chance education where they can sort of make up that kind of skills gap, and or we design our program in a way that works for people with low levels of literacy, where they don't need much reading, etc. It's much more picture and visual based, and you know that works too. It, you know, it can be done. You just need to be aware of it. For the more softer socio-emotional skills, that's where maybe some of the personal counseling, you know, like I described in my earlier example, comes in, where you work with people over time and you start to address self-esteem, self-management, things like that, be it at one-on-one level or in group settings, right? Like group little sessions. And of course, you can also try to connect with people, these people to sort of some sort of technical skills, basic technical skills that they can use. But I would still caution us to say, you know, skills are just one piece in that puzzle of where these people struggle. So if we only did something around skills, most likely the program, I mean, we really wouldn't help people much, because the rest is still there. So again, it goes back to the comprehensive programs. I'll give you another nice example of a program that's shown to be very successful, and that's called the graduation approach. So this is a program that's been over the past years implemented in many countries in the world, targeted typically at the poorest of the poor. And it's a model sort of at the nexus between social assistance and labor market policies. And there's been now, it's amazing, there've been lots of scientific good evaluations about it, and this model has really had tremendous results in many countries. And what does that model do? What's the typical elements, even though there are some variations? Well, number one, it gives people a sort of a basic transfer of either cash or food on a continuous level. That takes out the basic needs of their sort of, that they need to meet, because they have that covered. And secondly, it gives them an asset, a productive asset. It could be livestock, it could be a cow, but it could be something maybe to set up a small shop. So something with which they can generate an income. Okay, then they get technical training to use that asset. Okay, they also get some maybe support to savings, so that the money they generate from the asset they have now, they can maybe put aside for an emergency or for investment back into the asset, buy another cow eventually, or grow the shop, right? And then it typically also includes sort of counseling or sort of regular kind of meetings where some of these, they walk through challenges and issues that they have, and other skills, and et cetera, et cetera. And then there's even something around sort of health education and all of these things. So you see, there are skills in there. There's some technical skills, there's some soft skills elements in there. But again, it also tackles the other deprivations of their lives around lack of basic needs, lack of assets, health issues. And, unless we fix them together and simultaneously, just providing technical skills on something wouldn't help us. So we need to have that holistic approach, and I think that's really what we're learning from the international evidence for people in multidimensional poverty.
Fantastic, Kevin. You have tapped on two important concepts that are asymmetric information and lack of mobility. How could policymakers design more inclusive labor market policies to address these issues?
Wow, well, this is a big question, of course. Now, again, I think it's there's not the one answer. It's just we need to think of locally, what does it mean if people don't have that information? I'll take them one by one. If people don't have access to information, and we know that from many programs, by the way, right? So many times what happens when programs open, and we're just like, okay, now it's open, please sign up, and and then we close it when it's full. Well, what we miss there is that information doesn't travel equally fast to all people, right? The people who are somewhat a bit more connected, who have better connections maybe to the program, who have a cousin there, who have better access to technology to learn about it, they learn about it faster, they sign up faster. So it's in a way the more privileged who tend to benefit more even from, support programs. Those who the most vulnerable will have also the worst networks, poorest information, and it doesn't even get to them. So that's that issue. So what does that mean, for instance, in this case? If we know this is an issue, we need to adopt strategies that are much more like door to door, so really grassroots, and some of them government programs aren't necessarily well placed to do that. They don't have the infrastructure, but also through sort of civil society. I think this is really one of the things that probably is one of the most common strategies: trusted civil society structures that are well rooted in these communities where poor people live, that know those poor people, right? And that can be the intermediary to transfer information, and that are also trusted to then, bring them in, tell them about a program, etc. So I think that's on the asymmetric information. On the mobility side, again, I would say, one example I gave is, we need to probably get away from thinking, well, let's just, where's this thing convenient for us? Oh, we have a training center here. Let's, we'll just organize everything here and then people will come. I mean, that's just not going to work. So is it possible to adopt a more decentralized approach where we bring services to the people? As simple as that. I think that's one. Sometimes that can be tricky. Let's say for certain technical trainings where you need a certain infrastructure somewhere, you can't just move the infrastructure around easily, right? But many times it works, especially for things even like, and for, by the way, for things such as job search support and other things, you know, people have come up with mobile units, also in different fields, right? Just essentially go to them. That's one strategy. And the other way is, okay, if we can't go to them, help them, take them from where you want them, and you know, you take them, you organize the bus, you organize whatever it takes to take them there. Don't leave it up to them, or at the very minimum, help them pay for getting there, right? With some like voucher for transportation or something. I mean, that then the right tool would depend on the local context, but these are certainly two key issues. They need to be factored in, and if we don't, you know, the program is probably not going to fly.
Great. Kevin, we are talking from the policy side or the policy making side. However, from the citizen or citizen engagement part, how could citizens contribute to alleviating poverty?
Okay. Well, I think this is one thing that comes to mind immediately is around networks. So one thing poor people are poor in is the right networks to to information, you know, the networks, other people who are better connected because they have better access to information, they have access to maybe employers, they have access to other resources, etc. So this is why coaching or mentoring or even informal, you know, it doesn't even have to be officially part of something, but how the average citizen can help someone else. You know, so in many cities there have been, yeah, maybe some sorts of, and people just do it. You have a friend who, you know, maybe is poorer than yourself, and you're taking care of that family in some way and you support them. One way you're able to support them is, you know, better certain things that are going on, how to get some administrative thing done, etc. So I think how average citizens can really help, and what they maybe sometimes underestimate, is that they have an understanding of the institutional environment and they have connections with other people that also can be useful to poor people, people living in poverty, and that they can't easily access. And so you, as the other citizen closer, you can help them bridge that gap. And maybe, you know, it could be helping them, accompany them with certain administrative procedures, or with, you know, helping them find out where to go for a certain problem. Essentially, you know, helping them fix some of the problems in their lives, so that they can free up some energy for getting work, searching for work, staying in work, right? So yeah, taking out some of these other challenges. That's what comes to mind.
Great, thank you. So, you know, according to the Human Development Index, that is also produced by UNDP's Human Development Report Office. So the latest Human Development Index says that for the first time since 1990, human development has fallen. What about poverty? Like, poverty has been a major goal in the MDGs, in the Millennium Development Goals, but also in the Sustainable Development Goals. It is the first one. It's SDG 1, no poverty. Are we on track?
To be honest, I don't have the best sense of now all the data, and I think the picture is mixed. And even the latest data we have, let's say on the multidimensional poverty, if I remember correctly, it actually predates COVID. So, you know, COVID has thrown everything around. And so we just don't always have that up-to-date data till now. I think from some of the things I was reading in the report is that actually in many regions or in countries, including India or so, there's actually been tremendous progress on extreme poverty, reducing extreme poverty, multidimensional poverty as well. So it's not all bad at all, right? And countries are able to achieve progress through really sometimes, I mean, India has some really major anti-poverty schemes that they've been running for years and so on and so forth. So countries can do something. There's no doubt, but I think, you know, what we always need to be careful with is looking behind averages, right? So saying, oh, poverty is going down. I mean, okay, that might feel good, but like, let's look behind the curtain. There are some countries where it's probably going down a lot and others where it's getting worse, right? So I think lots of the countries in facing fragility, war, etc. I mean, things have not gotten better, right? I mean, we have still lots of conflict and issues in the Sahel, Yemen. I mean, there's other places on Earth that where really conditions are very tough, and where that situation is not improving. That's one. And even in the countries or regions where things are improving, we should ask ourselves: are they improving for everyone in the same way, or are some groups left behind, right? So is it improving more for men or more for women? So I don't have the data to say what's changing how, where, but I think it's always good to have that critical mindset to, when we look at data, look a little bit behind the averages and really see how's it really playing out.
Absolutely, Kevin. What you're saying is absolutely correct. And as you have said, like if we look at the average, we need to look beyond averages. And that was the title of one of the human development reports, one of the recent ones. So if we look at the averages, the world is getting better. And there's this famous book by Hans Rosling, Factfulness, where we see that the world is getting better and things are better than we think that they are. However, we need to look beyond these averages, and we need to see the inequities that still exist, and that are really exacerbated between rural, urban, like be it in all sorts of divides, in income divide, digital divide, etc. All sorts of multidimensional poverty. We have questions from the audience. I'm going to take some. What measures could be adopted to ensure? Okay, so I think that this question was saying that with COVID-19, the status of women and like the status of women has regressed a bit. So what measures, and I'd say a lot, but like, okay, what measures could be adopted to ensure women economic integration and participation in the labor market? Yes, so what measures could be adopted to ensure women economic integration and participation in the labor market? I was trying to translate it.
Right. Yeah, no, so, you know, when we take the gender angle, it adds a certain, you know, nuance to it for both people in poverty, as well as, you don't have to be in extreme poverty, just, you know, women in general have faced more, have, well, gotten more out of the labor market, you know, even well-educated ones, non-poor ones, during COVID. Now, so what are some, so again, so I would say one thing, again, not all women are equal, right? So women in severe deprivation, who maybe face also domestic violence, other things, they will need different things than a maybe better educated woman that has just lost her job due to COVID, but that has good skills and other things. So, you know, we need to differentiate. Goes back to being a good doctor. You know, what's the issue? Can we do some light touch things, or do we need deeper interventions? But what we know about supporting the labor market integration for women is, again, I think also that picture, we need to go beyond just narrow thinking around these pure labor market supports and look at what happens outside the labor market. So, of course, one of the things, women are traditionally more affected by men, is household and care responsibilities, right? And that's also the reason why in COVID things got so much worse, because someone had to somehow, you know, catch all that craziness that happens, and kids couldn't go to school or not go to daycare, and who is then more likely to quit their job or to stay at home? It's more often the women. It wasn't only women, but it's more often the women. And so in general, when we think about supporting women's economic integration, we need to think about these things outside the labor market: availability and access to childcare, or care in general, right? It's not just children. Women also take care of the elderly more so than the men. So we know that labor force participation of women is very low, where this care infrastructure is not well developed, right? So this is, for instance, one of the big issues. It also goes around, for instance, labor market regulation. So, you know, sometimes we have countries who try to protect women, for instance, through very generous maternity leave policies and so on and so forth. So for instance, in Eastern Europe where I work, you know, when you're pregnant or we have a child, you have fairly generous staying out of work for a long time getting. Now, how is that funded? In countries like Germany or so, this is sort of more government funded. In other countries, the employers have to pay most of that. Now, employers don't like that. So then what happens is, oh, you're a young woman or you're a woman, you may get pregnant, you may not even be yet, but I'm already going to discriminate you from the start. So we have to think through the complexities of also some of these labor policies that they don't disincentivize hiring of women, for instance. What else? There is I mean, there are some other things I'm just trying to, I mean, women also have, so when we think of poorer countries, more tricky access to resources. So when we think about assets, land, so in inheritance laws, it often goes more to the man. So how do we help women? They're more likely to be at disadvantage, maybe to get a loan or to get money. So these are things we need to think even more critically about for women than for men. In some countries, even the legal framework, right? So there are countries where, I mean, what we maybe know better because it's more striking is that in some countries, you know, traditionally women weren't allowed to drive a car or something. So this is then maybe very blunt, but what happens in many more countries is that, for instance, there are more restrictions around women's work at night. Or you know, in certain sectors, transportation or some things that aren't where they're not allowed to work. So, for instance, a very nice from the World Bank, Women, Business, and the Law, that captures a lot of this information. It's great. So all of that to say that when we think about economic integration of women, we need to think, of course, of these traditional tools, making job supports, training, all of these things available, but we need to think about them in connection with childcare, you know, legal environment, labor regulations, and other things to really make a dent. The one anecdote, or it's not an anecdote, the one thing I like to think about in Europe, one of the things that was the biggest contributor to women's labor force participation in Europe, what was it? It was in the 60s, 70s. It was the washing machine. It's the washing machine that freed up so much time that allowed women to go to work. You know, this is not a labor policy. This is something that just made their lives so much easier and gave them time back, right? And I think this is a striking example of thinking outside the box. Yeah.
It definitely is. I'm going to take one last question from the audience. So how could we revert the drawback brought by the pandemic when it comes to labor market challenges?
So revert those regression, is, if I understand the
sure.
regression that happened
when it comes to labor market challenges.
Okay. Well, you know, this is a big one. Now, I think well, the first thing, one of the things I've learned during COVID, because what we also did and what international institutions and governments did is trying to understand where was the crisis affecting the most, who was it affecting the most in terms of the people, in terms of the firms, right? It didn't affect everyone equally. It affected certain sectors more specifically, such as tourism, retail, the face-to-face things, and it affected certain people more, like we just talked about, women more than others, maybe young people more in some ways because they're, you know, not so established in the labor market.
Vulnerable groups,
The vulnerable ones. So I think the first thing to do is, of course, pay attention to those who were the hardest hit in some ways. The second thing I learned is these crises were, this isn't, you know, we in the beginning of the pandemic, we made the mistake to just think, oh, a crisis hit. This, like, we think about it like an economic crisis. A crisis hit, everything goes back, and how do we rebuild? But a health crisis, a pandemic, isn't just a one-time hit. It's a very dynamic crisis. And hence the situation changed a lot over time. Restrictions were put in place, restrictions were lifted, put in place back. And, you know, it's not over. I mean, we're still in there, and some people predict, I mean, you know, there's other types of pandemics that may happen. So I think it's not just a linear view of, you know, something we were in a good place, we got hit by a shock, and we have to get back to where we were. I think it's more about how do we build resilience in the labor market so that we can recover, but also maybe try to be less affected in some ways and protect people better as future crises or a new wave of the same crisis hits, right? So I think that's something, and that's where, to bring it back to labor policies, it means also it's not just about labor. I mean, one of the big issues during COVID is then, again, social protection, of course, has a role to play, and how do we integrate these different policy areas? But yes, of course, labor policies also have to adapt. How do we, you know, adapt to digital services, other things? But again, we have to be careful. Digital services may be more likely to exclude the most vulnerable. So there isn't an easy answer, but I think the big theme maybe to take away about COVID and the way forward is about resilience, and not just building back to one level, but it's about how are we better able to cope with these crises that are not going to go away. There's just going to be more of it, health or climate or otherwise, right? So we have to be cognizant of that.
Definitely. Thank you, Kevin. Very nice takeaway and nice words to conclude our session. Do you have anything else, or?
No, thank you. I mean, this, you know, this is, of course, an important topic, and thank you for putting the most vulnerable on the agenda here at in the context of the Frankfurt Book Fair. I think that's, you know, a very important conversation, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you, Kevin, so much. And as you can see, the book fair is packed, and this is the third day, and there are 2 more days. So this is only a tiny bit of the book fair. The book fair is really huge. So if anyone happens to be around, just come past and come just say hello at our booth. We are in Hall 4.2 in the Mohammed Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation's booth. And we have 4 more sessions. We have 2 tomorrow, and then 2 on Sunday. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Central European time. That is 3 p.m. UAE time. We'll be having a session about private sector engagement, and then another session about bioinformatics, and on Sunday about sustainable urban development and volunteerism. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a nice
Bye.
day. Bye.